Alrighty, everybody. It is currently Saturday, February 21st, 2026, and I am coming at you live from a living Anglo-Saxon tapestry, which will be used to tell the story of a man named Harold Godwinson. Or maybe it's pronounced Godvinson, and we're going to maybe talk about why that is, or we're definitely going to talk about why that is before we get into today's episode. So, a little bit of background on the history of England, a little bit of context for what's happening in this story. So, England and just that British Isle, not really Ireland. Ireland doesn't really come into play too much over or at all over the course of the story, so we're not going to really talk about it that much. The main British Isle, whatever the fuck it's called, Britannia, I think that's what it's called. You guys know the one I'm talking about. The one that England's on. England, Scotland, and Wales. That island. For a while, the British rule, or not the British, the Romans ruled most of it for a while. And then obviously the Roman Empire falls around the 400s, but they had really lost control of most of their territory even well before that. And so it was mostly inhabited by Celts, various Celtic tribes like the Picts, I think, are one of the tribes, and a few others. Uh, and they kind of, you know what I mean, in between the time where the Roman Empire fell or began to decline, they had a little bit of a break. And then around the year 450 AD, a few groups of people, it was the Angles, the Saxons, and the Utes, who are kind of, I guess, Nordic. They're from Denmark. They sail over in 450 AD and conquer England, mostly. And this is where we start to get like a really solid idea or the solid foundations of what England would eventually become. That's kind of what the Anglo-Saxons, that's what they call them. That's what the Anglo-Saxons did in England. They established kind of the monarchy, the nobility, which would transfer to different groups of people, but the Anglo-Saxons are the ones who really started it. And so they get over there around 450 AD. And then in, what was the year? 650 something? 793. Not even close. And then around 793 AD, Vikings, I think mostly from Norway, but I'm sure from all over there, they started raiding the British Isles as a whole, but specifically it started in this area called Northumbria, which we're going to talk about a little bit. But it's northern England. Obviously, north is in the name. It's like the border of Scotland down. It's a pretty big area. At this point, I don't know how inhabited England is. I think they got like a solid foothold, but I don't think this area is super densely populated or super well defended. But the Vikings are doing raids there starting around the year 793 AD is when that all started. So that's kind of the background, the context for this episode of what's going on. And we're going to get more into the context of these two groups, or of the Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings, and then another group called the Normans. And if you don't know Norman, if you've ever heard of the invasion of Normandy, that's where the Normans are from. I'm pretty sure they're Germanic, although I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they are. They were like a tribe, monarchy, kingdom, whatever you want to call it, from that little, you know what I mean, that little, I don't know what you would call it, like the dick, but on the top of France. The dick from the top of France. That's where the Normans are from, and that's where they're hanging out. So they're like, and Normandy was chosen to be the ground invasion into the mainland of Europe because of how close it is to England. So it's very close to England. Denmark isn't super close to England, but somehow the Anglo-Saxons ended up conquering it, and the Utes as well. I don't know why the Utes aren't involved in that name at all, because it was the Saxons, the Utes, and the Angles who were like the three major, I guess, Viking type kingdoms of Denmark. But the Utes aren't involved in the name at all. And so that's the context of what's the historical context of England at this point in time. Anglo-Saxons are ruling it. They're still kind of getting raided by the Vikings and stuff, especially along that Northumbria area. And then the Normans just across the channel, they're doing something over there. I don't know exactly what they were doing over there, but they're doing something over there. So those are our, I guess, three main players in this episode. And we're going to be talking about one guy in particular, Harold Godwinson, or Harold Godwinson. I don't know. I don't know if it's Vin or Win, because in like Germany in those languages, they pronounce their W's like V's. So it might be Henry Godwinson or Godwinson. I think Godwinson sounds better. Just because God, already pretty sick, and then you add a win in there, it's like I'm a god and I'm winning. I don't know. I think Godwin sounds better than Godvin, but whatever his name is, he is an Anglo-Saxon in England. And so let's get into the episode. This is a 90 tab episode. I have a lot of notes. I think I have 5 pages, 5.5, something like that, of notes for this episode. But there's a whole lot of other shit going on. And I had about 90 tabs open, and so I tried to, because I was trying to get this into like a story, you know what I mean? As opposed to just fact after fact after fact. I tried to make it a little bit more of a story, but I'm not exactly great at that. You know, I'm not an author. So it might seem a little bit nonsensical for the first part, but the second part, the 2 major events that we're going to be talking about in here, those are a little bit more just a good old-fashioned timeline with a little bit of a story plot going on in there. So let's get into this guy, Harold Godwinson. So on January 5th, 1066, Harold Godwinson was crowned the Anglo-Saxon King of England, not knowing he would be the last. Like I said, we got a bit of a setup for this story. The Normans are kind of hanging out on that northern coast of France, and then the Vikings are raiding Northumbria in that area. So it's like, why is he going to be the last Anglo-Saxon king of England? You know what I mean? What's going to go on to make him the last one? Are they just sick and tired of the Anglo-Saxons? Or the Celts? You know what I mean? The more native Celts, are they going to rise up? I don't know. It's been about, 600 years at this point, so I think the Celts have been properly bred out of existence, at least in England proper. You know what I mean? They're still hanging out in Wales and Scotland at this point, but I think in England proper, the Anglo-Saxons have established themselves as the dominant ethnic group in England. So I think we can rule the Celts out. That's why I didn't talk about it too much. I would firmly say the Celts are just hiding in their swamps and their mountains up in Wales and Scotland and stuff at this point. But this guy, Harold Godwinson, he's crowned as the king. And this is... We got a lot of names in this episode, but it's always... Like, I don't know what the Queen of England's last name is, or I guess it's the king. That bitch died a few years ago. I don't know what the King of England's last name is. Is it Tudor or something? It's because I know the Tudors ruled. There's like the Tudor era or some shit in England. So I don't know what their last name is, but I know what this guy's last name is. It's Godwinson. And so this guy, Harold Godwinson, we're going to call him Harry G for short. Our boy Harry G. Harold was the son of Godwin of Wessex, who was one of the most powerful noblemen of England under Canute. I almost said cunt. Canute. C-N-U-T. Canute the Great and his successors. And this is for a little bit of context, the monarchy is pretty unstable at this point. Like, there's a lot of beef and rivalry over who's going to be the successor of the king. You know what I mean? Even with this guy, Canute the Great, there was like a whole big fucking like conspiracy, a whole lot of drama around all this shit. I guess the rules of succession weren't exactly properly established at that time. You know what I mean? They weren't formalized at that time. So there was a lot of beef over who was going to be the successor. And this guy Godwin, he supported one guy over another guy, and he did become king. The guy that Godwin supported became king, and then he died like almost instantly. And so this other guy became king. But Godwin's a crafty motherfucker. You know what I mean? And he somehow ended up getting in the good graces of the guy that he like. I think there was like a murder plot. Like he tried to murder the other guy who was potentially next in line for the succession. But he's a crafty man. You know what I mean? And that's Harold Godwinson's father. And so I guess that's how they came up with the last name Godwinson, because they were like, fuck it, there's too many Harolds. We got to identify which Harold is which. And so that's how he ends up with the last name Godwinson, because he's Godwin's son, which that's how a lot of last names work, especially in like the Nordic countries. And obviously, as we established, the England has been invaded and kind of colonized, culturalized, I don't know what you want to call it, by Nordic people. So like Anderson, Johnson, all that stuff, that's like a Nordic type of last name. And so, yeah, his dad is a pretty big nobleman. I think, so he's the Earl of Wessex, but I do think he has like some shit going on in Northumbria. Somehow Northumbria ends up getting involved in this situation. Beyond just that's where the majority of the Viking raids are happening, it somehow gets brought into this somewhere along the line. So anyway, he's the son of this very powerful nobleman, and he's maybe the most powerful nobleman outside of like the royal, like the main royal family of Canute the Great and like all his cousins and shit like that. Like Godwin's right up in there. And so after Godwin's daughter Edith married then King Edward the Confessor, so this is way down the line. This is after Canute and like all the drama with his successors. There's this guy, King Edward the Confessor. Godwin's daughter Edith marries him, and Harold was named the Earl of Northumbria and entered a mordancio, which mordancio is kind of like an informal marriage, and what it means is in the manner of the Danish. Which was like a commonly recognized thing at this point, but it wasn't condoned by like the Catholic Church or whatever. But anyway, he enters a mordancio relationship with Edith the Fair to curry favor with his new earldom. So we got, and also his sister Edith, who marries Edward the Confessor, she wasn't originally named Edith. I guess I guess back then, maybe women also changed their first name when they married their husband, but she also married the King of England, Edward the Confessor. So, I mean, this guy's the King of England. If he tells you to do something, you're going to do it. Her original name was like Gwyn or Gwyneth or something like that. But she ends up changing her name to Edith and marries this king. And so now Harold is the Earl of Northumbria. And like I said, this is a very big area in England. I don't think it's super populated at this point, like I said, but he controls a lot of area. And he enters this mordancio relationship with Edith the Fair, she was from Northumbria, and like her family was from Northumbria, and so a lot of the locals there knew who Edith the Fair was. And so kind of this new guy, Harold Godwinson, he comes in and he's like, he's the new Earl. Fuck that guy. He's not from here. He doesn't know us. And so he kind of gets in this relationship with Edith the Great to be like, look, I'm invested in this whole Northumbria thing, so calm the fuck down. That's kind of the setup we have going on. And he's on track to be one of the most powerful nobles, just like his father. I don't remember if he was the oldest of his father's sons. We're going to be talking about some of Godwin's other sons. But he's on track to basically replace his dad as the most powerful noble in England. So Godwin did have a few sons. I think he had like 7 kids total, 4 sons if I remember correctly. One of his sons was named Totzig, and the other was named Swen. And Swen was exiled in 1047 after abducting the abbess of Leominster. So he kidnaps this chick, probably to rape her. I mean, if I had to guess, this is this is ancient times in England, and she was probably like, "No, I don't want to fuck you," and so he kidnaps her, and this is like a whole big deal, and he ends up getting Swen, Sewyn. Where did Swen, whatever, some fucking Norse Viking name. He ends up getting exiled at this point, and this other guy Totzig, he's also a pretty powerful earl, powerful in England. But Swen gets exiled, and probably the only reason that this was a big deal was because she was like the abbess of Leominster, which we're going to be talking about abbeys a fair bit, and those are kind of like monastery castle type setups. It's not exactly like a big earldom like our boy Harold Godwinson had with Northumbria. It's more of like a small local thing, and so they are. I think they are nobles, but they're not exactly. They're not quite earls, but they are nobles, and so that's probably why this was a big deal. Like if he just kidnapped a peasant and raped her, I don't think it would have been that big of a. And I'm making up the rape thing. I don't. It's just a guess, but I mean, it probably. Why else would he have done it? I mean, can we be honest here? Why else would he have done that? And so that's probably why this ends up being a big deal. And I don't remember. He maybe gets exiled to. I think he gets exiled to like Belgium, which Belgium isn't a country at this point, but he gets exiled somewhere over there. And he's chilling there for a while. But then in 1049, Sweyn returned to beg pardon from the king, but he was refused unto his former lands by Harold and his cousin Bjorn. And Bjorn ends up getting kidnapped and killed by Swen before Swen returns to exile. So Swen's a big fan of the kidnapping. He's a very and there's a lot of Harry G's family is getting like kidnapped and held as prisoners during this point. There's like some weird stuff with that. But I guess that was just like a popular move back then, was just kidnap a noble and hold them as a prisoner. But as we're gonna find out, Harry G does not give a fuck. Harry literally could not care less. Literally refused to let his brother onto his former lands. Yeah, and so when Swen gets exiled for kidnapping that abbess of Leominster, his lands get split up between Harry G and his cousin Bjorn. What was his name? Yeah, Bjorn. And so his lands end up getting split between those two, which pretty much makes Harry G the most powerful nobleman besides the king, basically, in all of England. But Swen is a fucking like these dudes are savages. And you gotta remember, these people, especially like the daughters and stuff like that, they're getting like sent off and married when they're like 14 years old. And also their dads are having kids when they're like 60. Like these motherfuckers are old as hell, still banging out babies and shit like that. So they are related and stuff, but they're not super close. You know what I mean? They live super far apart, and this is England in, you know what I mean, the 1000s. They're not seeing each other too often. So while they are related and they are all a part of the royal family, the royals are all related at this point to a certain extent. Maybe they're cousins or second cousins or something like that, but they are all related. And so they don't, it's not really family as you think of it. Even though they are brothers, there's, they've kind of been raised to care more about their status as noblemen and royals, and like some of them have more of a loyalty to like their people that they rule over and stuff like that, as opposed to their family. And obviously, this guy Swen is a loose cannon, which is probably why Harold's like fuck off. But part of it was probably also to like curry favor with the people and the king and stuff like that. So that's kind of the beef with Swen over a little bit. He does end up getting pardoned and returning to England, but that's not super important. So in 1051, Harold traveled to Normandy, like we were talking about, where he accompanied the king. This guy was the king at the time, King William, into battle against Conan II, even saving two of William's men along the way. And this is 1066, you got to remember, so there is a little bit of like legend and stuff like that. And the thing I said about the tapestry at the beginning, a lot of this history, the way they recorded it, I guess, was, I'm sure they wrote a lot of it down, but apparently a lot of it was on tapestries, which is interesting. But yeah, he goes to Normandy, and it's not exactly clear how he ends up there. There's a few different stories about him in Normandy. One of them is that he was like just checking it out, like going on a fishing trip, and his boat crashed. But this one was a little bit more of like an official visit to see what was going on with King William in Normandy. And King William is fighting this guy Conan II, and I think Conan II was the king of some uh, fiefdom in the Holy Roman Empire, I think. And so saves two of his men, and I don't think he fought in the battle. I think maybe a little bit. I think he was like part of the chase of the battle, but I don't think Harry G fought in the battle with William. But he's like chilling with him while William is going to battle against this guy Conan II. Saves two of William's guys from quicksand, which is it's very funny. And so they're fighting together, and they end up coming across like this church or something like this after the battle. And so they pull up to this church after the battle, and at this church, William knights Harold, who ends up swearing fealty to William over sacred relics. It's not exactly clear whether this happened or not. Like I said, there's a lot of legend involved. Not like mythological legend, but like we don't really know. It's like we're just looking at a fucking painting being like, this happened, right? It's it's kind of like if you looked at like MC Escher's, like the painting he did of the stairs or whatever, and was like, that's what it looks like wherever the fuck MC Escher's from. Right? And so allegedly Harold is like swears fealty to this guy William, who is the king of Normandy, over sacred relics. And I don't know exactly what that means, but the Catholic Church does get involved in this story a little bit later on. And so I, I don't know. I know the Catholics are like they have like the skull of Saint Anthony or like Mary Magdalene or some shit like that. So maybe it was something like that. It was like a relic from a saint. That would be my guess as to what he swore fealty to William over. But regardless, he allegedly swears fealty to William, who is the king of that little dick we talked about up in Normandy. And so with his father now dead, Harold was the second most powerful nobleman in England besides the king. Uh, but after a doubling of taxation in 1065, he was forced to overthrow his brother Totsig. He has a couple other brothers, but we're only going to be talking about Totsig from here on out. So that's the only name you got to remember. Totsig is his brother. So his brother, he's a pretty powerful earl. Jesus fucking Christ. He's a big earl. That's just what big earl. That's what we're good. I cannot say powerful earl, so we're just going to say big earl. He's a pretty big earl at this point. And this fucking taxation that he did, this wasn't like a small thing. This threatened civil war and like a peasant uprising in England. And so Harold is like, fuck, dude. Like, I gotta do something about this. Ends up overthrowing his brother Totsig just to prevent this civil war. And so England at this point is pretty unstable. You know what I mean? The nobles are wiling out a whole lot. The Vikings are still doing raids, especially in Northumbria and stuff. It's a contentious time in England, especially 1065. It's an important year to remember. So he overthrows Totsig, is like, get the fuck out of here. And Harold replaced his brother with this guy named Morcar, and he's not super important. He ends up replacing his brother with this guy Morcar, but in doing this, he drove his brother to make an alliance with Harold Hardrada, who was the his nickname was the Hard Ruler, and he was the king of Norway, which is just, I mean, like I said, they're siblings, they're brothers, but they're not super close. But this does feel like a particularly dick move, right? Your brother is the Earl of Northumbria, and Northumbria is constantly getting fucked by Viking raiders and shit like that. They're coming in, burning the villages, plundering, raping, all that shit. And then you go and make a pact with that guy. Like, that feels like a dick move even for then. And the doubling of taxation kind of seemed like it was unnecessary. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm siding with Harry G on this one. You know, like I said, he ends up becoming the king of England. So I think I'm gonna side with the king on this one fairly. And Totzig pulls off that dick move, making this alliance with Harold Hardrada. Hardrada. That's it's gonna be very hard for me to pronounce this. Hardrada over in Norway. And so Totzig is chilling in Norway with Harold Hardrada at this point. And Harold, he's the hard ruler. He's like a tough, that's why he ended up getting that nickname. He's like a tough guy, rules with an iron fist, believes in like the power of the Norwegian kingdom and stuff like that. And so later that year, after King Edward fell into a coma without naming a successor, the Witten, or Witten, which is the King's Council, they convened and named Harold Godwinson as his rightful successor. And so that's how he ends up becoming the king, even though, so Edward the Confessor doesn't have any kids, and he's married to Edith, and he falls into this coma late in 1065. And he allegedly wakes up from the coma and names Harold as his successor, although we don't exactly know. And this once again comes from a tapestry. The tapestry shows Edward the Confessor, and he's like in bed, clearly sick and all that stuff, and Edith is right beside him. And obviously there's no writing in the tapestry, it's just art, and he's pointing at a dude, and they just kind of guessed that that dude was Harold Godwinson. That's kind of how they came up with this idea that Edward the Confessor wakes up from his coma, tells Edith, yo, your brother is my successor. He's the second most powerful nobleman in England. He clearly cares about the country. He overthrew his own brother, kicked him out of the country so that a civil war didn't start. He's going to be the next king of England. And there was a couple other guys that were being considered, but I think he went with the right choice here with Harold Godwinson. Like Harry G, that boy's got that dog in him. This guy's an animal. He's a fucking beast, dude. He rules so hard. He's the sickest dude, one of the sickest dudes of all time. You know, we kind of talked about the Black Douglas, I did an episode about the Black Douglas, previous episode, and he was very sick, but he was kind of just in it. He was in it partially to get Scotland their independence and to get them out from under the rule of the Edwards. It was Edward Longshanks, then Edward II, then Edward III. We kind of talked about that. That's part of the reason why he fought the Civil War, but part of it was that Edward Longshanks had stripped him and his family of their nobility, and so it's kind of like, yeah, he's doing the right thing, but not for the most pure intentions. Whereas I feel like Harold Godwinson, he's just doing it for the pure intentions of keeping England Anglo-Saxon. You know what I mean? Keeping stability in his country and preventing his people from coming under the rule of another leader. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. That's kind of his big thing that he did. And he was so close, dude. He was so close. Like I said, he was the last Anglo-Saxon king of Scotland. Kind of spoiled it at the beginning, but we're going to talk about why he became the last Anglo-Saxon king of Scotland. So anyway, he gets crowned king in 1066, very beginning of 1066, January 5th, and after hearing of Harold's coronation, William, that boy he was riding with earlier that he went into battle with against Conan II, that guy, William, the king of Normandy, he began building 700 ships to launch an invasion to take Harold's crown. And at first the Pope was like, dude, you can't do that. He is the rightful king of England. You know, I know England's kind of a mess right now. They almost had that civil war because Totzig doubled the taxation and shit like that, and they're getting raided by the Vikings, but you can't go invade him. But then William ends up bringing up that whole thing about Harold swearing fealty to him over sacred relics. And the Pope is like, and this is Pope Alexander II. Alexander II is like, all right, you can go invade England now, and you can go and take the crown from Harold, or you can try at the very least. And so these 700 ships were, a lot of them were warships, but a lot of them were like supply ships and stuff like that to launch this invasion. And they're not fighting a whole lot on the sea. These are kind of like, they're just kind of trying to transport these dudes from Normandy, that northern coast of France, to England to get this invasion really going on. And he's building these ships immediately after he hears about Harold's coronation as the king. Like, he hears about it and he's like, let's go. And I don't think it was because he thought he had like a rightful claim to the throne. He probably was just like, England's looking real weak right now. They just got a new king. I think I could take it over and get some money, get some land and stuff like that. And so he's doing that. And simultaneously, King Hardrada, who was the king of Norway, aided by Totzig, began preparing an invasion with 300 ships and 7,000 to 9,000 men. Don't exactly know how many men, but he's going from Norway over to England with 7,000 to 9,000 men. And his argument that he has for it was there was like some earlier deal with between the Norwegians and some older royal family in England. And so he's like, he's using that as his justification, but they're not Catholic, and so they don't really need to justify it to like the Pope or whatever. Not like William did. Like, William had to go to the Pope and be like, swore fealty to me over sacred objects, I get to go invade him now. Hardrada is kind of like, I can invade him whenever the fuck I don't have to listen to the Pope. He does technically have that little justification of being like, well, there was this earlier deal, and it's like, well, why didn't you do it earlier then? Is it because you thought you were going to lose if you tried to do it? Right? You're just attacking England at its weakest moment. Kind of some bitch shit. A little bit of some bitch shit. You know what I mean? You're already raping and pillaging Northumbria and stuff like that. Like, you don't... what's in it for you? Right? Plus, you got Normandy and all that shit to the south, and they're going to be real pissed off. You know what I mean? Like, the Catholic kingdoms might unite to go and fight Hardrada at this point. Hardrada, he ain't like that. I'll just say that. William, he's a little bit like that. If you know, there's a famous William in English history. You might know who he is or who he ends up being. He's like that, but Hardrada is not. You know, he's just sending out like independent raiding parties and stuff like that, and so he thinks he can go and beat England. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what kind of fight Harry G puts up. And this is immediately after. Like, so William is up in Normandy, over in Normandy, like building the ships and all that stuff. Hardrada, I don't know if he built any new ships. I think he just heard Harold was coronated and he was like, fuck it, let's go. Next play wins. Let's get this shit. I'm going to be the king of England now. And obviously Totzig, that little fucking worm, that little fucking snake in the grass, is like, yeah, do it, go become the king of England, because he's obviously trying to get his earldom back so that he can double taxes. Clearly not a good idea. Like, him doubling taxes brought them to the brink of a civil war, and now he's gonna go try to fight his brother, who's the king of England now. God, Totzig is a bitch, dude. Totzig is really a bitch. Hardrada, he might be a bitch, but at least he has like this sustained beef with England. You know, at least he's clear about his intentions, and he didn't like betray anyone or stuff or anything like that. And you could say that Harry G betrayed Totzig by overthrowing him, but at the same time, what do you expect him to do? Let a civil war happen in his country? I wouldn't expect him to do that. Even if he isn't the king, you can't have a civil war going on. Like, it's not a great thing, especially a civil war over the doubling of taxes. Like, we're nobles, dude. We already have enough money. I'm not a big fan of Totzig, if you can't tell. I'm a Totzig hater. Born Toteg hater. I think Harry G rules. Swen, his other brother who kidnapped the uh, abbess of Leominster, not a big fan of that guy, but I do think that's pretty funny just to throw. Like, he could have had any chick. He's a powerful earl. Big Earl, sorry. He's a big Earl in England. He could have had any chick, but he kidnaps this fucking lady, the abbess of Leominster. I think he's just retarded. I think Swen, he's a bad guy, but he's just retarded. Whereas Totzig, he's a little bit more of a snake, a little bit more of a fucking rat. I don't like him. So anyway, they're doing this invasion and they're going for Northumbria. Like I said, the Vikings had been raiding and pillaging Northumbria for a while there, and so, and this is the northern part of England. Obviously, Norway's pretty far north, so he's like, fuck it, we're going to Northumbria. So after landing in England, Hardrada, that's just how I'm going to say it. I don't know how it's pronounced. I don't even know if that's how I spelled it. Hardrada and Totzig were confronted by an English rider. So they land in England. Obviously, he was probably kind of predicting this. You know, Harold knew about Totzig's alliance with Hardrada. He was probably predicting it, so he's hanging out up there, and he's also the former Earl. Jesus, Earl is just constantly a tongue twister. No matter what word you put it with, it's a tongue twister. But he's hanging out up in Northumbria, and that's where they end up landing at. And this one dude, just a single dude, rides up to Totzig and Hardrada, and he said Totzig would be reinstated as Earl if he returned to fight for England. And so Totzig is like, okay, but like, what about Hardrada, right? Like, what is Hardrada gonna get out of this? And the writer said Hardrada would get, quote, 6 feet of ground, or as much as he needs, as he is taller than most men. Whew, such a sick fucking line. If you don't understand what he was saying, the writer was basically like, Totzig, you'll get your land back if you come back to fight for England and get your men to fight for England. And then Totzig is like, what about Hardrada? And this guy's like, Hardrada's gonna get a fucking grave, dude. We're gonna kill this guy regardless. Fuck you. He's gonna get a grave on English soil. He's not getting buried in Norway. He's getting 6 feet of ground right here. We'll fucking kill this fool right here, right now. We ain't sending his body back to, be buried in a Viking funeral or whatever. We're burying him right here. Unmarked grave. Throw his body in the fucking trash. I don't give a fuck. That's what this writer is essentially saying, but more of like a calm tone, and he's saying it way sicker than that. 6 feet of ground, or as much as he needs, as he is taller than most men. God, such a sick fucking line. And from here on out, this is all just aura farming, basically. It's all, like I said, it is a cohesive story, but it's mostly about the aura of all of this shit going on here. And specifically about Harold's aura, because he's taken on the Norwegians and the Normans. They're both trying to invade him. And so the rider rides away. Totzig denies the request and all that stuff. And Hardrada asks Totzig, he's like, who was that guy? And Totzig informed him it was King Harold Godwinson himself, dude. Harold rolls up. He's like, yo, dude, I'll give you your land back, but I'm going to kill you. And you'd expect it to be like an envoy, you know what I mean? Some regular dude who the king doesn't care if he lives or dies. Nah, the king's going up there, his goddamn self, to fight for fucking England and to negotiate on behalf of England. Harold, I think, really did care about England and the fate of England, not just to protect his position as monarch, but because he really cared about the people and stuff like that. Like, this guy rules pretty fucking hard. And so he wrote up himself to Hardrada and Totzig to be like, surrender now. Just do it right now. Surrender to me. And you're going to get a grave, but you'll get your land back. One of you will survive if you just surrender to me right now. But I can't guarantee you that one of you will survive if you go into battle against me. And so that's kind of the setup for this battle we have going on. And so in the initial stages of the battle, the Norwegians were caught off guard and fell back behind a river with a single crossing. And that single crossing that they fell behind was called Stamford Bridge. You might have heard about this one. This is a very, sick. If you're a big fan of Vikings, then you've definitely heard about Stamford Bridge. Um, I don't think there's it's a sick story that people tell to be like, dude, Vikings ruled, berserkers rule, all that stuff, and they do. It's pretty fucking cool what ends up happening at Stamford Bridge, but it's not as cool as you might think. And so there's this bridge that the entire English army has to cross. I think they're at like 15,000 men at this point versus 7 to 9,000 men, but they have to get all their men across this bridge, Stamford Bridge. And on this bridge stood a single Norwegian berserker Viking, allegedly. It was some kind of Viking, uh, with a fucking axe, and he's just standing there with an axe. You know what I mean? Like the Northmen or some shit, just screaming, being like, "Come on, let's fucking do it." Uh, and he fought the entire English advance before being speared from underneath the bridge. And so he's on this bridge just swinging his axe back and forth. It says that he killed around 40 English members of the English army. And I guess the English just weren't big into longbows at this point. I think I know when they got big into longbows, but we'll talk about this later. I think they're just doing like spears and swords and stuff like that, right? Because you got to remember, they are Anglo-Saxons. They're kind of like Viking type people. And obviously Vikings, not exactly known for their archery, I'll say. But this guy speared from underneath, and he's just wearing like chainmail. He's just there in chainmail, no plate armor or anything, just swinging his fucking axe back and forth, kills 40 English dudes. And yes, he did take on the entire English army at once, but not really. He was standing on a bridge, and so he was probably taking on like 10 to 20 dudes. Pause. Pause. Which is still impressive. It's still impressive that he was taking on like 10 to 20 dudes at a time and fought long enough to take down 40 of them before some dude like went under the bridge, like floated underneath it and got his spear and stabbed the Viking from underneath. And so that's how they end up taking this bridge. And so this guy dies, the Viking at Stamford Bridge dies, and the English cross the bridge. And so after crossing the bridge, the English faced a Norwegian shield wall. And so the English are like pulling up and they see the Norwegian shield wall, right? We've all seen like those classic medieval movies and stuff like that where they kind of plant their shields. Or I don't think they planted their shields in the ground. They didn't have long shields like that, but they kind of locked their shields together and they're like, let's fucking go. Let's do this, right? And like I said, the English, they're not big fans of the longbow at this point. Like, if you don't know English history, they end up becoming pretty big fans of the longbow. They use it a whole ton. It was kind of one of their main things that allowed them to keep their independence for so long, or to keep from other European powers taking them over. But they don't have that at this point. So the English see the standing Norwegian shield wall, and they're like, fuck it, let's go. And so they make a line probably about, I don't know, 20 feet, let's say, from the Norwegians, and then they lock their shields, and they just sprint at the fucking Norwegians and destroy them. The Norwegians are in a defensive position. They've had time to set up, you know what I mean? They got a couple minutes from that Viking just staying there on Stamford Bridge and cutting down 40 Englishmen or whatever before he got a javelin up his butthole. And so they've had time to set up and get in like a nice defensive position. But the English, the Anglo-Saxons, dude, the conquerors, they're just like, fuck it, let's go. Lock their shields together, sprint at them, crush the Norwegians. Pretty decisively. And so they crushed the Norwegians, and in the battle which killed Harold and Totzig, Harold ended up ending the Viking Age in England, but was forced to face a new enemy in the south. So in doing this, Harold not only prevents Harold from taking over England and all that stuff, but he also essentially ends the Viking Age in the British Isles. He doesn't completely end the Viking Age. You know, I think it went on for another few hundred years there, maybe 200, something like that, where the Vikings are going out and raiding and all that stuff and pillaging and raping. But in terms of England getting invaded by Vikings, that's done. That's over with. Harold, that hard ruler, He's dead. They decimated the Norwegian army, destroyed them. Remember, they came with 300 ships. I think they left with 20. Like, that's how many. In Harold, being the nice, good guy that he is, he lets a lot of dudes leave and go back to Norway. But there was only 20 ships. Like, that's how badly the English fucked them. And the Norwegians weren't there for a super long time, right? Like, if the Norwegians were there for a long time, you could at least be like, well, maybe a lot of them died to disease or starvation or whatever. They weren't there for that long. And so it's just the English just locking their shields together and being like, let's fucking go, let's go, and just crushing them after facing that insane Viking on Stamford Bridge. So Harold ends the Viking Age, ends this potential invasion from Hardrada, but like we established, dude, King William of Normandy, he's in the south. He's getting ready for his invasion into southern England, which is, remember, they're in northern England at this point. And England's not a super big place, but like I said, this is 1000s AD. They can't just hop in the Subaru or whatever and fucking, you know what I mean, take I-35 south to get to where William is trying to invade them from. Like, this is going to be a long march. So he's facing two enemies at once. And, you know, another king who's not Harold Godwinson, he might have tried to negotiate with Hardrada and been like, you're not going to become king, but I'll make you like a powerful earl. Why do I keep saying it? Why do I keep saying powerful earl? I know it's not going to work out for me, but I keep doing it. I'm going to make you a big earl if you help me fight William in the south. But that's not who King Harold Godwin is, dude. King Harold Godwin says, England belongs to the fucking Anglo-Saxons, and I'm going to fight anybody who says otherwise. Let's go. Let's get this shit going. That's who the fuck King Harold Godwinson is. He rules so hard, you know. And like I said, lesser king might have ended the Viking Age in England and been like, that's enough. I'll go, you know what I mean, negotiate with William of Normandy. Once again, that's not who Harold is. It's not who he is. He rules England, and he's going to do it no matter what it takes. And so now we're on to our second aura farming event. Not really. I would say Harold farmed most of his aura at Stamford Bridge, but he just has it. I don't know what else to say to you guys. Anyone else would have been like, all right, we lost. We're getting invaded by two incredibly powerful forces at once. England is in a shit situation. We were just on the verge of civil war because of my retarded fucking brother. I'm just going to negotiate with these guys. You know, I'll give them land in England or whatever. Nah, not Harold. And that's why he's so sick. He will fight to the bitter end. He'll go one after another. These two super powerful kingdoms want to fight me at the same time. Fuck it. Let's do it. Let's go. You know what I mean? He's like a Jocko Willink. Good. The Norwegians and the Normans want to invade me at the same time. Good. You know, that's the type of guy that Harold Godwinson is. And so, immediately after his victory at Stamford Bridge, Harold and his men turned south to face William and his army, who were set up in earthworks near Hastings. So, when our boys up in the north fighting against Hardrada and all that stuff, William has a lot of aura, but kind of a snake move. He ends up going to Hastings to set up kind of a defensive position to launch his invasion into England. Once again, William is sick. He does rule, ends up becoming the man and shit like that, but kind of a bitch move. You know what I mean? Face him on the beaches and just fight there. You know, don't set up a defense. Don't be smart and tactical, dude. This is medieval times. This is about what's the coolest, manliest, most macho shit I could possibly do. I don't care if my entire army gets decimated. You need to be sick at this point in war, you know? Fuck tactics. Medieval warfare. Go ride your fucking horse into battle and get immediately killed by some skinny peasant from Wales who has an arrow, right? That's what you should be doing. You shouldn't be. Tactical war sucks, dude. I want glory. I want the glory of war. But hey, William ends up getting a pretty sick nickname, which we'll talk about at the end. He sets up these kind of defensive positions in Hastings. And so honestly, at this point, Harold and his whole army are kind of on the offensive because he's established. William has established himself in Hastings in southern England. And so they're basically the invading army. The native army, Harold and all his boys, they kind of now seem like the invading army. And so Harold and his men marched 240 miles immediately after fighting the Vikings in Northumbria. And they end up setting up a shield wall on a nearby hill, and they waited for a charge from William. Yeah, they're defending it. They're just trying to prevent William from getting deeper up in there. Pretty sure their army doesn't have the strength it did at this point. You know what I mean? I'm sure a lot of them died fighting the Vikings and all that shit. And Harold has like a similar sized army to Hadradada. He has about 7,000 to 9,000 men, if I remember correctly. I'll Google it real quick. Battle of Hastings. And Hastings, might have heard of it. This is a very important, one of the most important things in the history of the world. Oh, shit. So, probably about 10,000 for William of Normandy, and then about, I would say another, so they're pretty evenly matched, it kind of seems like. Once again, a lot of this comes from tapestries and stuff. We don't exactly know. The estimate for the Normans is 7 to 12,000, and then the estimate for the Anglo-Saxons is 5 to 13,000. So I'll just say they're evenly matched. That's what they have going on. And so they're waiting for this charge from William on this hill, and as they're waiting, a barrage of arrows came from William's army, but because the English were on this hill, it had very little effect on them. A lot of the arrows sailed over because the archers couldn't properly aim, and then a lot of them just like kind of bounced off their shields. Once again, because they're on a hill, they just kind of have to put their shields up. It's not that big of a deal. And so next, William sends spearmen and cavalry to break the line, but this too fails. So we have this barrage of arrows and then a cavalry charge. If you know a lot about English, you know what I mean, especially medieval warfare, this kind of ends up becoming the cornerstone of English military tactics. You just have a ton of fucking arrows go over, and then you send in a cavalry charge. Or not cavalry necessarily, but some sort of ground charge with infantry. It might be knights, might be cavalry. William sends both. He sends his spearmen and his cavalry, and I think they were heavy cavalry, and I don't think the English had any heavy cavalry. So, yeah, this is pretty powerful charge, but they got to go uphill, you know. And the English have an entire country to their backs. So, I don't want to Monday morning quarterback this thing, so I won't. But English could have made some better decisions. And so the Normans, they start retreating because they're getting completely fucked by the English shield wall. And the English are pursuing the Normans. And at this point, the Normans believe that William, their king, is dead. And so they're like, fuck, and they're freaking out and they're panicking. And then, fucking through the battle, dude, the Norman king William rode through the battle shouting that he was still alive. He's like, look at me, look at my face, I'm still alive, fight, we have to take England, you know. So sick, dude. I would say I don't think it's as sick as when Julius Caesar saved the Roman Empire when he was fighting Vercingetorix, which, if you don't remember that story, Vercingetorix and all his boys are basically on this hill, and the Romans and Julius Caesar have Vercingetorix surrounded, but Vercingetorix has like 100,000 dudes. He has like a ton of fucking dudes. He amassed like all the Celts and maybe like some Germanic tribes together into one big army to fight the English. And so he has like a ton of dudes, but they're up on this hill in this city or this town, and the English surround them. This is the Battle of Alesia, if I remember correctly. And so, but they have a lot more soldiers. The Vercingetorix and his boys, they have like a ton of soldiers, but the other soldiers don't know that Vercingetorix and all these people have been surrounded by the English. And so the plan for Vercingetorix and his army that he has up on this hill is to somehow break through the Roman line so that they can go and get the other people. And they almost did it. At one point, the Roman line was only one person wide. And that's when they say Julius Caesar rode in on his fucking white horse with a red cape on, and he held the line against Vercingetorix and the Celtic army so that they couldn't break through the line and go and get the other people. And that basically ended up like doubling the size of the Roman Empire and saving the Roman Empire as well from this massive Celtic army. William, pretty sick. I would say, I don't know which is more pivotal in world history. I don't know who was, because people talk a lot of shit about the English, but you can't say they're unimportant in world history. You know, they end up conquering like 25% of the world's landmass, primarily because of this moment. And so anyway, he's shouting that he's still alive, and William and his men rallied and mounted a counterattack, pursuing the English up a nearby hill, and this is most likely where our boy Harold Godwinson died. This is probably where he ended up dying. They don't really know. They say Edith died with him as well, his wife Edith the Fair, or his, what was it, Dancio, whatever, however you pronounce it. She ends up dying with him at this point. And so the English, they actually continued fighting, and they even formed a new shield wall, but they were eventually defeated by William the Conqueror. That's what he ends up getting known as, William the Conqueror. And obviously, we end up knowing how the English conquered the entire world. They go out on boats, and they conquer it all. Part of that comes from the Anglo-Saxon, that whole culture, but also a lot of it probably comes from William the Conqueror. But they might have not been able to do any of it at all if Hadroddata and Norway had kept weakening Northumbria through raids and stuff like that. So I would say Harold is just as important in the history of the British Empire as our boy William the Conqueror is. And William the Conqueror, he ends up becoming King of England, but his dynasty doesn't last that long. Like I said, the Anglo-Saxons, they had about 600 years there, from about 450 AD to about 1066. 1066 is when the Anglo-Saxon, monarchy chokehold they had over England fell, and the Normans rose to power. But the last Norman king was Stephen of Blois, who reigned from 1135 to 1154. So not even 100 years. The Normans ruled England. So that's Harold Godwin. Look, he ended up losing, but he put up a fucking fight. He didn't die like a bitch. He didn't lose like a bitch, dude. He was fighting two incredibly powerful armies at the same time. Two pretty powerful seafaring people at the same time. Took down one of them, and he could have had the capacity to beat William the Conqueror, but William the Conqueror's strategy, there's a little bit of argument about this, but they say that William the Conqueror, when we talk about how they sent that mounted, that cavalry and spear charge to go and break the English line, and then the English, it didn't break the line, and then the English chased them down the hill, they say he did that on purpose, and that he did it again later on in the battle, when they mount the counterattack, and there's kind of a lull in the battle there, and then they go and attack them again after Harold gets killed in that initial counterattack. But anyway, they say that was like the way the Normans did it. They say that they were really big fans of feinting an attack and then slaughtering people as they pursued them. And that's why when you hear a lot of, if you know a lot about later English battles, they talk about don't pursue the enemy. Just stay in your lines, stay in formation and all that stuff. Don't pursue them because we end up getting mixed up in all that shit. There's a good chance a lot of us end up dying. Like there could be another another wave coming to get us. They could be hitting us with our own tactic, essentially. But yeah, that's Harold Godwinson, the last Anglo-Saxon king of Scotland. Cool guy, sick guy. Um, yeah, that's all I've got for this episode, guys. Hope everyone listening has a good day, a good week, a good year, a good life. Maybe not the greatest episode. I felt the passion, but I don't think it came out very well. But regardless, hope everyone has a good day, a good week, a good year, a good life, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Ping.